History is a fragile thing. It's written by the survivors, the victors, the record keepers. But what about those stories that were erased? What about the civilizations that left behind whispers, fragments, anomalies, things that don't quite fit into the timeline we've been taught? Tonight, I want to ask you a question so strange, so unsettling, that it has haunted archaeologists, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike for decades. What if humanity has lived this nightmare before? We know the story of 1945. We know the mushroom clouds that rose over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We know what nuclear fire looks like, what it does to a city, to the people who live there. The world has lived in the shadow of that horror for nearly 80 years. But what if those weren't the first nuclear blasts on this planet? What if they were simply the most recent? Imagine a war not between nations as we know them, but between civilizations long forgotten. A war that didn't leave behind history books or films or treaties, but glass, melted stone, and haunting words in ancient texts. This isn't fantasy. This isn't a novel or a Hollywood script. Buried deep in the sands of Egypt, scattered across the deserts of India, and hidden in the oldest myths of mankind, are fragments of a terrifying possibility that 12,000 years ago, an advanced civilization may have destroyed itself with nuclear weapons. Let's begin with a mystery so bizarre scientists still argue about it to this day. Vast stretches of desert where the sand has been fused into glass. We're not talking about small patches scorched by lightning. We're talking about entire fields of greenish, glassy material, fused at temperatures so extreme, no ordinary fire, no volcano, no natural heat source we know of could explain it. To create this kind of glass, you would need temperatures rivaling those at the heart of a nuclear explosion. And yet this glass isn't from 1945, it's from thousands of years ago. Long before the first cities of Mesopotamia, long before the pyramids, long before recorded history even begins. And then there are the texts. The Mahabharata, one of India's most ancient epics, written over 2,000 years ago but describing events believed to be much older, tells of a weapon so bright it shone like 10,000 suns, a weapon that turned entire cities to ashes, a weapon that left survivors with hair falling out, their skin burning, rivers poisoned, birds falling from the sky. Sound familiar? It should, because those are the same horrors recorded in Hiroshima. But these words were written centuries before the atom was split. So what do we make of this? Coincidence? A poetic exaggeration from ancient storytellers? Or a memory passed down through generations of something humanity experienced once before? This is the question we'll unravel tonight. Was there really a nuclear war 12,000 years ago? Did a forgotten civilization rise to incredible technological heights, only to wipe itself out in fire and ash? Or is there a simpler explanation, one rooted not in lost empires and doomsday weapons, but in the raw, unpredictable power of nature itself? To answer that, we need to look at the evidence. And once you see it, you may never look at human history the same way again. When investigating extraordinary claims, the first question we have to ask is simple. Where is the evidence? It's not enough to rely on myth or speculation. To truly understand whether a nuclear war could have taken place thousands of years ago, we must sift through the archaeological, geological, and historical record. And strangely enough, the trail begins in the deserts of North Africa. In 1932, an Austrian scientist named Patrick Clayton was surveying the sands of the Great Sand Sea near the border of Egypt and Libya. While traveling by jeep, he noticed something unusual crunching beneath his tires. It wasn't ordinary sand or stone. It was glass. Large chunks of pale yellow-green scattered across an area stretching hundreds of kilometers. This was no ordinary glass. Known today as Libyan desert glass, it is among the purest natural silica glass ever discovered. Some pieces weigh over 20 kilograms. Jewelry made from this glass has even been found in the tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun, crafted into a scarab amulet, proof that the Egyptians themselves recognized it as something extraordinary. But the real question is, how was it formed? To fuse desert sand into glass requires temperatures of at least 1,700 degrees Celsius, hotter than volcanic lava, hotter than almost anything naturally occurring on Earth's surface. Lightning strikes can sometimes create small glassy formations known as fulgurites. But not like this. Not over hundreds of kilometers. not in massive, flawless chunks of near-pure silica. For decades, scientists debated the cause. Some proposed meteor impacts, others suggested ancient comet airbursts, but skeptics of mainstream explanations point out that no meteor crater large enough to account for such widespread glass has ever been found in the region. Could something else, something unnatural, have caused it? Thousands of miles away, in the Indian subcontinent, ancient texts describe weapons and events that sound eerily familiar to modern readers. The Mahabharata, an epic poem composed over 2 millennia ago but drawing on much older traditions, recounts battles between powerful kingdoms. One passage describes a weapon unleashed with devastating consequences, a single projectile charged with all the power in the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes an entire race. The text goes on to describe winds carrying deadly heat, food becoming poisoned, survivors losing their hair and nails, and animals dropping dead in agony. These descriptions are chillingly close to eyewitness accounts from Hiroshima in 1945. Radiation sickness, contamination, mass destruction. But remember, these words were written centuries before modern science, referencing events believed to have occurred thousands of years before even that. Skeptics argue that the Mahabharata is allegorical, that these are poetic exaggerations describing ordinary warfare. But the sheer detail, the emphasis on brightness, heat, and aftermath, it raises questions. How did ancient writers conjure descriptions so close to nuclear reality? Further physical evidence comes from ruins scattered across parts of India and Pakistan, particularly the sites of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, ancient cities belonging to the Indus Valley civilization. These settlements flourished around 2000 BCE, still thousands of years after the supposed nuclear war 12,000 years ago, but important in this discussion because of what was found there. Excavations have revealed skeletal remains lying in the streets, as if sudden catastrophe struck. The bodies show no signs of violent trauma, yet they are positioned in ways suggesting instant death. Even stranger, some of the stonework in these cities appears to have been fused, not burned, but melted, as though exposed to extreme heat. This phenomenon, known as vitrification, is rare. It can occur in nature from volcanic activity or lightning, but in archaeology, it has been documented at certain fortified sites in Europe where defensive walls appear to have been exposed to temperatures so high, the stones themselves melted together. But why would ancient people attempt to melt their own fortifications? And in the case of Mohenjo-Daro, why would ordinary urban dwellings show such patterns? Could this vitrification be the scar of something far more catastrophic than war with primitive weapons? Across the world, there are more puzzling geological anomalies. In Rajasthan, India, scientists discovered a region of radioactive ash covering several square kilometers. The levels of radiation were measured to be so high that the Indian government initially cordoned off the area. In southern Iraq, near the ruins of Babylon, excavations uncovered layers of fused brick. Not simply baked clay, but brick melted together as though exposed to temperatures exceeding anything achievable in ancient kilns. And in Scotland, dozens of ancient hill forts, known as vitrified forts, show signs of stone walls melted by extreme heat. The purpose, method, and origin of this vitrification remain unexplained. While mainstream explanations attribute some of these anomalies to natural events like lightning, volcanic eruptions, or even wildfires, the scale and consistency across multiple sites globally keep fueling alternative theories. Could these be remnants of a forgotten war fought with technology far ahead of its time? Complementing the physical evidence are the myths themselves. Nearly every ancient culture has stories of great civilizations destroyed in fire, flood, or divine punishment. The Greeks told of Atlantis, a mighty empire lost beneath the sea. Mesopotamian texts spoke of cities wiped out by heavenly wrath. The Bible's story of Sodom and Gomorrah describes fire raining from the sky, reducing cities to ash. Are these coincidences, cultural echoes of ordinary disasters, or fragmented memories of something far worse? A global catastrophe, perhaps man-made, retold and reshaped through the lens of myth over millennia. When we line up the evidence, desert glass requiring impossible heat, ancient texts describing weapons of fire and radiation, ruins showing signs of sudden intense destruction, the picture grows darker. It suggests, at the very least, that something catastrophic happened in humanity's distant past, something that defies easy explanation. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. For every piece of evidence suggesting ancient nuclear warfare, there are counter-arguments, explanations rooted in geology, natural science, and skepticism. So before we rush to rewrite human history, we must pause. Could it all be explained by meteor strikes, volcanic eruptions, or misinterpreted mythology? To answer that, we must turn from the mysteries to the skeptics. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And when it comes to the idea of a nuclear war taking place thousands of years before recorded history, the mainstream scientific community urges caution. While the anomalies are real, the desert glass, the vitrified ruins, the strange descriptions in ancient texts, skeptics argue that these phenomena have perfectly natural explanations. Explanations that, while less sensational, fit more comfortably within the boundaries of geology, archaeology, and history. Let us return to one of the most compelling pieces of evidence often cited: Libyan desert glass. Yes, this glass requires extraordinary heat to form, but skeptics point to well-documented natural processes that could account for it. Meteor impacts, for example, generate temperatures far exceeding those of nuclear explosions. When a large meteor strikes the Earth, the energy released is equivalent to multiple nuclear warheads. The intense heat from the impact can fuse sand into glass instantly. We know this has happened before. The famous trinitite glass found at the Trinity nuclear test site in New Mexico looks strikingly similar to natural impact glass found in meteor craters like Wabar in Saudi Arabia, or the impact sites in Argentina and Canada. So why no crater near the Libyan desert glass? Skeptics argue that not all cosmic events leave behind obvious craters. A comet or meteor exploding in the atmosphere, what scientists call an airburst, could generate enough heat to create vast fields of glass without leaving a traditional impact hole. In fact, the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908 flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of forest with no crater left behind. In this view, Libyan desert glass is not evidence of ancient nuclear warfare. It's evidence of natural cosmic bombardment, rare, but not impossible. Then there are the ancient Indian texts, the Mahabharata and Ramayana. Believers point to their vivid descriptions of bright flashes, burning heat, poisoned food, and survivors losing their hair. Skeptics, however, caution against reading these texts too literally. The Mahabharata is an epic poem, a vast tapestry of mythology, theology, and allegory. Its descriptions are often symbolic, meant to convey spiritual truths rather than historical fact. When the text speaks of weapons shining brighter than 10,000 suns, mainstream scholars argue that this is hyperbole, a poetic device meant to emphasize power and destruction. Just as we might describe a modern bomb as the wrath of hell itself, ancient poets used the language available to them. Radiation sickness, hair falling out, food contaminated. Again, skeptics remind us that famine, plague, and ordinary firestorms could produce similar imagery. Survivors of severe burns or poisonings often experience hair and skin damage. Birds falling from the sky could result from smoke inhalation during large-scale fires. From this perspective, the Mahabharata is not a nuclear eyewitness account, but myth-making at its most vivid. To interpret it as evidence of ancient atomic bombs, skeptics say, is to misread metaphor as science. What about the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, where skeletons were found lying in the streets as though sudden catastrophe struck? Archaeologists offer different explanations. Epidemics, famine, or flooding could account for sudden abandonment. Skeletal remains in ancient cities often appear scattered or positioned unnaturally simply because of the passage of time. Bodies disturbed by erosion, later activity, or even poor excavation methods during early digs. As for claims of melted stone or vitrified walls at Mohenjo-Daro, skeptics note that much of this evidence is anecdotal. Detailed modern studies of the site do not confirm widespread vitrification. Instead, signs of burning can be explained by ordinary fires, accidental or deliberate. Ancient cities were often plagued by conflagrations. In fact, layers of ash and charcoal are common at archaeological sites worldwide. Radiation, too, has been cited as evidence, but skeptics argue that measurements showing high radiation levels were either misreported or within natural background ranges. Granite and other rocks naturally emit low levels of radiation. Without rigorous peer-reviewed data, these claims remain unsubstantiated. In Europe, the so-called vitrified forts present another puzzle. Massive stone walls appear to have been subjected to intense heat, causing them to partially melt. Proponents of the ancient nuclear theory cite this as further evidence of forgotten high technology. But archaeologists propose more grounded explanations. One theory suggests that defenders may have deliberately set fire to wooden structures built into or around the stone walls. The heat from these fires, fueled by timber, could have caused localized vitrification. Another possibility is ritual destruction. Ancient cultures sometimes burned their own strongholds during ceremonies as symbolic acts of power or closure. While skeptics admit the exact reasons remain unclear, they maintain that vitrification does not require nuclear blasts. It could result from intentional human activity combined with ordinary fire and stone chemistry. Perhaps the most dramatic claim comes from reports of radioactive ash fields in Rajasthan, India. These areas allegedly measured radiation levels comparable to those found after modern nuclear explosions. Yet when geologists investigated, they found that natural uranium deposits in the region could account for elevated radiation. The Earth itself is radioactive in places, from uranium, thorium, and potassium isotopes found in rocks. Chernobyl-level readings, as sometimes claimed, are not supported by reliable published studies. Similarly, fused brick layers found in Iraq and other regions may not result from nuclear firestorms, but from ordinary kiln processes or destructive fires. Ancient construction often involved intense heat, and unusual archaeological finds can sometimes be the product of misinterpretation or exaggeration. Skeptics return to a simple principle. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If a nuclear war truly took place 12,000 years ago, where are the unmistakable signs? Where are the weapons, the reactors, the radioactive isotopes that would persist for millennia? Likewise, where is the infrastructure? Nuclear weapons are not forged in secrecy with primitive tools. They require vast industries, mining, enrichment, metallurgy, advanced physics. If such a civilization existed, skeptics argue, we should find more than myths and glass. We should find machines, tools, or at least fragments pointing to technological sophistication. But so far, we haven't. Finally, skeptics emphasize the resilience of myth. Human cultures across the globe tell stories of great floods, fiery destruction, divine punishment. These myths often share patterns not because they reflect the same events, but because human imagination draws on shared fears. Fire from the sky, waters rising, civilizations ending. To skeptics, the nuclear war theory is a modern reinterpretation of ancient stories, colored by our own technological anxieties. In the age of the atom bomb, we project our fears backward into history, seeing nuclear fire in places where ancient poets may have simply described storms, meteors, or divine wrath. Narrator's transition. But here lies the dilemma. Skeptics offer explanations that are logical, grounded, and backed by natural science. Yet anomalies persist, evidence that refuses to fit neatly into conventional boxes. Could it be that the skeptics are right, that we are simply misinterpreting the past through the lens of modern imagination? Or could it be that the skeptics, in their caution, are overlooking a truth too uncomfortable to admit? To explore that possibility, we must entertain the theories that challenge everything we think we know about human history. Skeptics dismiss the idea of an ancient nuclear war as fantasy, but when evidence refuses to fit neatly within accepted frameworks, we are left with an uncomfortable choice: ignore the anomalies or explore alternative theories. What if humanity has a deeper, stranger history than we've been taught? What if our ancestors were not primitive but advanced, perhaps as advanced as we are today, or even more so? And what if, like us, they held the power to destroy themselves? One possibility is that advanced civilizations existed long before the rise of Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Indus Valley. Mainstream archaeology tells us that complex societies only emerged around 5,000 years ago, with agriculture, cities, and writing. Yet new discoveries continue to push this timeline back. Take Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Dated to around 11,000 years ago, it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. Its massive stone pillars, intricate carvings, and sophisticated design suggest an organized society capable of advanced architecture, at a time when humans were supposedly still nomadic hunter-gatherers. If a site like Göbekli Tepe existed, what else might lie buried beneath the sands and seas? Could there have been civilizations even older, civilizations advanced enough to harness destructive technologies, and perhaps reckless enough to use them? Plato's dialogues describe Atlantis, a powerful island civilization that, in a single day and night of catastrophe, sank beneath the sea. For centuries, Atlantis has been dismissed as allegory, a moral tale about hubris. But what if it contains a kernel of truth? What if it recalls a real civilization that perished not from divine punishment, but from its own self-inflicted disaster? Around the world, myths echo this theme. Civilizations rising to greatness, then destroyed in fire, flood, or heavenly wrath. From the Mayan tales of the previous suns destroyed by catastrophe, to the Hindu cycles of creation and destruction, to Native American legends of fire falling from the sky, cultures separated by oceans tell similar stories. Is this coincidence? Or could these be cultural memories of a shared ancient catastrophe? Within this framework, some researchers argue that these catastrophes may not have been purely natural. The evidence, desert glass, vitrification, radioactive anomalies, could point to the use of nuclear weapons by a forgotten civilization. Imagine a global society, not unlike ours, that reached a technological peak. Perhaps they developed energy, industry, even weaponry, but like us, they carried within them the seeds of destruction. Conflict erupted, and just as the Cold War nearly brought the 20th century to nuclear Armageddon, perhaps they were not so lucky. A nuclear exchange could explain localized evidence of intense heat and radiation. It could explain sudden collapses, abandoned cities, and the myths of fire and wrath passed down through generations. Of course, such a theory requires a leap, but for its supporters, it ties together anomalies in ways that geology and metaphor cannot. Others expand the theory beyond nuclear weapons. They suggest that lost civilizations may have wielded advanced technologies that we can scarcely imagine. Technologies not identical to ours, but equally capable of catastrophic destruction. For example, some speculate about directed energy weapons, using principles of resonance or magnetism. Others point to evidence of ancient electrical knowledge, such as the so-called Baghdad battery, which some interpret as a primitive galvanic cell. Even the Great Pyramids of Egypt have been theorized by fringe researchers to be not just tombs, but energy-generating structures. While mainstream Egyptology strongly disputes this, the fascination persists. If such technologies existed, they may have left behind traces we misinterpret because we lack the framework to recognize them. Just as an ancient person might mistake a smartphone for a magical stone, we may be staring at the remnants of advanced systems and seeing only ruins. A broader perspective suggests that history itself is cyclical. Civilizations rise, achieve greatness, then fall, often through catastrophe. After collapse, survivors rebuild slowly, and over time, the cycle begins anew. This idea resonates with the Hindu concept of yugas, vast cycles of time in which human knowledge waxes and wanes. In the Kali Yuga, the age we are said to inhabit now, humanity has forgotten much of what it once knew. Could it be that 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a civilization peaked and then fell to disaster, perhaps of its own making? The survivors, scattered and diminished, carried only fragments of knowledge, myths of fire and gods, which they passed down. Over millennia, those fragments became the foundation of the myths we read today. Another possibility combines natural disaster with human memory. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth experienced what scientists call the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. a sudden cooling event possibly triggered by comet fragments striking the planet. If this event did occur, it would have unleashed firestorms, floods, and devastation across continents. Survivors might have described it as fire from the sky, weapons of the gods, or cities destroyed in an instant. If humanity at that time was more advanced than we assume, such a disaster could have erased their achievements, leaving behind only traces of glass, fused stone, and myth. Thus, when we read of weapons bright as the sun, perhaps we are hearing not of nuclear bombs, but of cosmic fire, natural, but no less destructive. The truth may lie somewhere between myth and science, between human action and cosmic accident. Ultimately, these theories all point to one possibility, that human history is not a straight line from primitive to advanced, but a series of rises and falls. Why do we remember fragments, the myths of fire, the anomalies in stone? Perhaps because trauma imprints itself on collective memory. Civilizations may collapse, but survivors tell stories. Over generations, those stories transform into myths. The details fade, the causes blur, but the essence remains. Something terrible happened, something too great to forget. And why do we forget the rest? Because catastrophe destroys not only lives, but libraries, cities, and continuity. Knowledge is fragile. A nuclear war, a cosmic strike, or a sudden flood could erase centuries of progress in days. Survivors might struggle simply to endure, leaving only whispers of what came before. So, where does that leave us? With possibilities, with theories that stretch beyond accepted history, with hints that humanity may not be the first advanced civilization on Earth. But whether these clues point to nuclear war, cosmic disaster, or something stranger still, one truth remains. Our past may be far older and far more complex than we dare to imagine. And yet, with all these possibilities, one question remains unanswered. Were these truly the scars of ancient technology, or simply the scars of a violent planet? To close, we must look not for certainty, but for perspective. We have traveled across deserts and ruins, sifted through myths and manuscripts, examined the anomalies of stone and glass, and weighed them against science and skepticism. And still the question remains unanswered. Could a nuclear war, or something like it, have taken place not in the modern age but in humanity's distant past? Or are we reading too much into natural disasters and ancient poetry? The evidence, taken at face value, is unsettling. Vast fields of desert glass, requiring heat beyond ordinary fire. Ancient texts describing weapons brighter than 10,000 suns, whose aftermath eerily mirrors radiation sickness. Ruins with stones that seem fused, skeletons lying as if death came suddenly. And myths, endless myths, of civilizations destroyed by fire from the heavens. Individually, each piece might be explained away. Desert glass as meteor impact, the Mahabharata as allegory, vitrified forts as ritual burning, radioactive patches as natural uranium deposits. Skeptics offer grounded answers, yet collectively, the pattern persists. Too many anomalies, too many echoes across time and culture. At what point do coincidences stop being coincidence? Science demands evidence, and rightly so. Without artifacts, without measurable isotopes, without unambiguous proof, the nuclear war hypothesis remains speculation. And yet, skeptics themselves acknowledge that human history is full of gaps. The deeper we dig, the more surprises we find. Only in recent decades did we learn that humans built monumental temples 11,000 years ago at Göbekli Tepe. Only recently have we begun to understand the global upheaval caused by cometary impacts and climate shifts at the end of the Ice Age. What else lies buried? In deserts, in jungles, beneath the rising seas? Is it possible that the evidence we seek simply hasn't been found yet? Myths endure for a reason. They are not mere fantasy, but memory. Distorted, reshaped, passed through countless generations. Fire raining from the sky, gods unleashing terrible weapons. Cities turned to ash in an instant. Were these myths metaphors for ordinary wars and storms, or the memories of survivors, retelling what they had seen in the only language they had. To dismiss them entirely is to risk discarding humanity's most ancient testimony. Perhaps when ancient voices spoke of the wrath of the gods, they were really describing the wrath of man, or the wrath of the cosmos itself. Even if the nuclear war hypothesis is wrong, the thought experiment forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Civilization is fragile. In 1945, with the detonation over Hiroshima, humanity demonstrated its capacity to destroy itself. For decades during the Cold War, the world teetered on the edge of annihilation. And today, with thousands of nuclear weapons still armed, the danger has not passed. If a civilization before us did reach that threshold, whether 5,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, or earlier still, it is not hard to imagine how it might have ended. The lesson is clear. Technology gives us power, but it also demands wisdom. Without it, history may repeat itself. Perhaps it already has. And so we return to the mystery. Was it meteors or mushroom clouds? Cosmic fire or human fire? We may never know for certain. But one thing is undeniable. The story of humanity is far older and far stranger than the textbooks tell. We are a species haunted by memory, of floods, of fires, of cities swallowed in an instant. Whether these memories come from natural catastrophe or from our own self-destruction, the warning is the same. We are not invincible. We are not permanent. Civilization can vanish, and when it does, it leaves behind only ruins, glass, and myths. So, the next time you hear of an ancient myth describing fire from the heavens, or see a photograph of glass fused in the desert sands, ask yourself, are these the scars of nature, or the scars of ourselves? The evidence is there, the stories are there, the mystery remains. What do you think?